first question to you, Mr Mayor, is from Assembly Member Russell.
Can I again, as I do on this issue, thank the Assembly Member for her continued support on this very important issue. My ambition was and still is to be the greenest mayor ever, and I'm on track to achieve that. I've been clear that we face a climate emergency and there's an urgent need to clean up London's toxic air. Since becoming mayor, I've set ambitious targets that are some of the boldest in the world. I want London to become a zero carbon and waste city and have the best air quality of any major world city. Since taking office, we've made significant progress in delivering on these goals. London was one of the first 3 mega cities to produce a climate action plan to be compatible with the Paris Climate Agreement, and this year the Carbon Disclosure Project rated London as one of only 7% of cities globally to receive an exclusive A grade for our climate and environment actions. I've introduced the world's toughest emission standard, the ultra-low emission zone, to clean up London's filthy air. The Conservatives opposed bringing this in this year, but this has already seen almost 75% compliance and 9,400 fewer cars driving into central London per day. We've created a new on-street rapid electric vehicle charging point network from 2 points when I became elected to over 200 points now, more than New York or Paris. There are now over 200 electric buses operating in London, now the largest fleet in Europe. And we have 2 exclusively electric double-decker bus routes in London, 43 and 134. These aren't just the first in London or a first in the UK, they're a first for Europe. I've also delivered on my manifesto commitment to deliver 12 low-emission bus zones ahead of schedule. I've also delivered on my commitment to make London the world's first national park city, and I've planted more trees in my first 3 years as mayor than the previous mayor did in 8 years. I'm also taking on an international lead. I'm the vice chair of C40 and I'm working with partners to bring down the prices of electric buses and lobby for greater climate action and tighter environmental standards. However, I only have powers to deliver less than half the emission cuts required to make London zero carbon. We urgently need new policies and funding at national level.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and you know I support several of your initiatives, but it is my job to push you further and to share good ideas from the Greens and the community that can help when there is so much at stake with the climate emergency. Have you got a plan to decarbonise transport in London by 2030?
So the plans we've published are, as you know, 2050, with timelines and resources. The big issue in relation to transport is the grid. And so one of the things we're doing is lobbying the government for both powers and resources, and if we get more powers and resources, we can quite easily move towards 2030. My concern is, at the moment, without the government support, it's difficult to see how we get to 2050. And that's why I mentioned the fact that only half the emissions are transport, the other half, construction, housing, River Thames, aren't in our power. So at the moment, it's difficult to get to zero carbon by 2050, let alone 2030.
So at the moment, there isn't a plan. You've been clear that you're against Heathrow expansion, but you do support expansion at Gatwick. Doesn't that undermine your climate emergency declaration? Well,
firstly, there is a premise in the beginning of your second question which is wrong, which is you said there was no plan to get to 2030 zero carbon. There would be very easily if the government was to give us the powers and resources. Once we know we can get to zero carbon by 2050, it's not difficult, bearing in mind the climate emergency, to move forward to
yes,
2030.
But Mr Mayor, you could have a plan, but can you answer my question about Gatwick, please?
And we've got a plan to get to 2050, and with the right support, we can move there to 2030 as well. In relation to aviation expansion, you'll be aware that I've joined the judicial review in relation to the decision of the government to have a new runway 3. We've been given leave to appeal, and that hearing will be held in October. One of the concerns I've got is that Heathrow appeared to be bagging the improvements we've made to air quality through our policies from City Hall as a way of justifying the expansion they want to do in Heathrow. I'm quite clear in relation to expansion in London. I will not support expansion of airports in London if it leads to
but to be clear, you do support expansion at Gatwick?
Well, no, I've been quite clear. If the argument is there needs to be increased aviation capacity in the southeast of the country, there is a much better solution to Heathrow, which is both less environmentally damaging, less damaging to air quality. It's cheaper.
Mr Mayor, you support aviation expansion at Gatwick?
Well, that's an assertion, not a question. The question I think you're asking is, do I support...
What I'm hearing you say.
Well, what I'm explaining to you is, if the argument is we need increased aviation capacity, the answer is to have that increased aviation capacity not at Heathrow runway 3.
And do you accept that question, do you accept that we need more aviation capacity?
Well, it depends. Well, that's an argument that's got to be made. We know that the Climate Change Committee said there's a number of things got to be satisfied if they're going to support aviation capacity being increased. I'm saying if the argument is we must have increased aviation capacity in the southeast of the country, the answer isn't Heathrow.
Thank you. Would the Greenest Mayor ever build a new motorway tunnel at Silvertown?
There's no motorway tunnel being built at Silvertown, and that misrepresentation of what's happening leads to the public being cynical about politicians, whatever colour you are on the ballot paper. The reality is this: we've got a position in that part of London where the air is toxic, where there can be 2-hour traffic jams caused by Blackwall closing down on average 700 times a year, leading to children in those schools breathing in toxic poisonous air. We have the least reliable bus going through that tunnel. People don't use it because it's so unreliable. What we're proposing is not to stick a head in the stands in the sand and have status quo, but to have a solution to the grid lock that exists around that part
Mr.
of
Mayor,
London.
every time you answer this, it gets a bit worse and you sound a bit less convinced. The Greenest Mayor ever would not be supporting business as usual at Gatwick or at Silvertown, and I have no further questions.